All right, I think we are up and live. Good evening, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight for this important discussion about how the trial penalty manifests itself in Pennsylvania's legal system and why we need to really create mechanisms for second chances for people in Pennsylvania's prisons. My name is Celeste Trusty, and I am FAMM's Pennsylvania State Policy Director. So first, I want to thank our co-hosts for this event tonight, NACDL, the Justice Collaborative, ACLU of Pennsylvania, and Americans for Prosperity Pennsylvania. Please take a few minutes later and check the work that each of these organizations is doing in the criminal justice reform space. And of course, if you'd like to get involved in what we're doing over at FAMM, you can text FAMM, that's FAMM, to 21333, or visit us at famm.org. So for tonight's topic, in America, and especially here in Pennsylvania, retribution and punishment are accepted as the primary and appropriate responses to harm. And unfortunately, there's a shameful absence of mercy in our system to balance that out. Our definition of justice is so arbitrary in this country, and I think that the Vanishing trial film really shows this so well. As a direct result of our lust for punishment, we have an exceedingly large aging and ill prison population here in the Commonwealth. And some of these people have already served decades in prison, enriching their prison communities and themselves, and they would be mentors and leaders in their home communities if they were given an opportunity for a second chance. But right now, as we'll hear from our panelists, opportunities for second chances for people serving these excessively long and life without parole sentences are extremely limited here in Pennsylvania. We'll hear tonight about brothers Dennis and Lee Horton, who could have been home with their families in 10 years or less if they accepted a plea offer, but instead they were both sentenced to life without parole because they chose to exercise their constitutional right to a trial. As we have this discussion tonight, I want you all to ask yourselves, how is sentencing someone to die in prison at trial considered the appropriate definition of justice when justice was defined as something so much less severe in a plea offer? Lately, there has been a groundswell of attention to the vital work being done to address racism in policing. And we all know that the targeting and criminalization of Black people and people of color in our systems does not stop at policing. In the criminal justice system, our charging and sentencing policies and procedures also cause direct and disproportionate harm to Black people and people of color. It is far past time for us to reimagine what justice can and should look like at every point of contact in our systems. I'm so honored to introduce our incredible expert panel for tonight's discussion about criminal justice reform in Pennsylvania. Our moderator for tonight is Joshua Vaughn. He is the multimedia reporter for The Appeal. And our panelists are John Fetterman, the Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania and Chairman of Pennsylvania's Board of Pardons. Wana Saadzoi, a criminal defense attorney, Pactel Executive Committee member, and Chairwoman of the Pactel Probation Reform Task Force. And finally, Rochelle Horton, whose family has been directly and unimaginably harmed by the trial penalty and excessive punishment here in Pennsylvania. If you have questions for the panelists, please type them in the comment section and we'll do our best to try to get them answered. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. Josh?
Thank you, Celeste. I really appreciate all of you for being here. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I appreciate the opportunity to, be part of this. So obviously a part of this is in response to the Vanishing trial film that FAMM has released. And I guess just to start off, if any of our panelists have had a chance to watch the film, I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts were on it. So that's open to anyone on the panel.
Wana Saadzoi. I'm a private criminal defense attorney in Pennsylvania and a proud member of the Pennsylvania Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And the film really accurately demonstrates what you see on a daily basis as a defense attorney. It's very heartbreaking, and imagine having to deal with a system that is very unjust on a daily basis. You do become numb to it. But what I enjoyed about the film was I felt like there was a spirit of resilience and hope, and that it wasn't saying, well, this is just how it is. It was saying, okay, this is our problem, and we're not going to accept it. So I thought the spirit of the film was excellent and an accurate portrayal of the way things are.
I think the film powerfully illustrates the reality on the ground in Pennsylvania. It's very frequent that we'll encounter inmates that are before us that have been condemned to die in prison. and they were offered plea deals of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And they said either I'm innocent or they went to trial, and then they get the ultimate penalty, and that's to die in prison. And the one that really jumps out in front of me, and I'm honored to be joined by a member of their family, is the Horton Brothers. These men have led a impeccable life in terms of no juvenile arrests, no adult arrests, and not a single misconduct in prison during the 52 years of shared incarceration together. And yet they were offered, as part of a deal, 4 years in prison. Now, the film makes an important point. Like, if that's what justice is, anything above what was originally offered is just pure punishment, and it's a trial penalty. And that is counterintuitive to public safety. But more importantly, I think it's completely antithetical to what justice really should be.
Wana, correct me if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Can we just take a quick step back for anyone who maybe hasn't seen the film, who is tuning in? Can you just briefly explain to us what the trial penalty is and how it plays out?
Well, the way it plays out is that prosecutors have way too many cases that they can handle. That's the problem number one. So they have to come up with a way to process these cases because judges need them moved. And the way they do that is through plea deals. So they put these offers on the table, and this is where the mandatory minimums come in. You need a heavy hammer on one side to say, well, you have a choice. You can either go to trial and risk 25 years, 5 years, or you can take this plea deal. And after a while, you begin to condition defense attorneys. You begin to condition every member of the criminal defense community that this is what we do. You come in, you take the first offer, maybe the second one, and we just process you as if you're not even human, right? This is like a factory. And that's what's happened here. We are unable to handle the load. And nobody stops for a moment and thinks, maybe the load is inappropriate. Maybe we shouldn't have that load, right? And where is that coming from? And then people don't want to have an honest conversation. The honest conversation is that load pays a lot of people. There's a lot of people in the chain that, that there's income that's provided through that system, but they don't. I think now is the time for us to have that kind of flexibility and creativity. Think that those same jobs, the individuals that you're so worried about, they can have another role in this system, but a more positive one. So that's what the trial penalty is that you take a deal, often sometimes for things you haven't done, because the idea of a 5-year flat mandatory minimum is too much.
Sure, and just so I'm correct on this. So I mean, I've seen, many cases through reporting where people are charged with, possession with intent to deliver, and just want to make sure that they understand, kind of where we're at and kind of quantify it here in Pennsylvania. So if I'm understanding correctly, possession with intent to deliver, if you're convicted of that offense, even first offense, you're looking at a minimum of 6 months in prison. So what a prosecutor will do will offer to, generally bump that down to, say, simple possession, which is much less, probation or something along those lines. Okay.
Maybe in the nice counties, if they don't
Okay.
charge you with a felony to bring you down to a misdemeanor, they're going to charge you with several felonies to get you down to maybe one felony.
Okay.
They've gotten very eager. So the right principle, but they're not as nice as in your hypothetical. So the sentences depend on the weight, the type of drug, if the person's had any priors, right? And we thought as a criminal justice community that we had this great victory in 2015 because we got rid of a lot of these drug mandatories. And I'm sure the lieutenant governor can tell you about what's going on in Harrisburg. They found their way back. And now the mandatories that Harrisburg wants to pass carry 25 years, carry the type of years that the federal government got away with, right? And the reason is because people are getting smart. They're fighting back. And this is the message that they're going to send. You're not going to fight back. Okay. And it's a tough pill to swallow at times.
Okay. Let's move over to Rochelle. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
and talking with us. I mean, obviously your family has been heavily impacted
Yes.
by this. Can you just share your story and kind of what that's meant to your family?
Well, when Lee and Dennis first got prosecuted, it was devastating. It was so hurtful and sad because I know Lee and Dennis did not do this crime. They're innocent. And my brother, let me talk a little bit about my brother Dennis. My brother Dennis was a normal kid, do the normal things, ride bikes, go fishing, go to camp. Never was violent, even in his teenage years. And he was a very serious guy. In his teenage years, he went to school, he graduated, he got a job and worked all day and every day. Never in no violence, never locked up or anything. So that was even more devastating because we knew that my brothers was not like that, Dennis or Lee. Now, let me tell you a bit about Lee. Lee was a young boy, he used to stay in a house, look at comic books, look at TV, read books, he liked things like that, you know, and he wasn't a violent, he never got in fights and none of that kind of stuff. He wasn't violent, you know, and growing up in his teenage years, you know, when he got 18, he had a fiance, which is his wife now, and he had kids. He worked every day, did a lot of family things. We was a very close family. You know, we did a lot of family things together. So, and my mother, she was just heartbroken, and my father. Heartbroken to see their two sons go to jail for life for something they didn't do. And the guy that posted did it is walking the streets right now. So that's even more painful that my brother's been in jail for 27 years.
Can you just explain that a little bit more for us? If I'm understanding correctly, your brothers were convicted of second-degree murder, which is felony murder, meaning that even at prosecution, they weren't accused of actually killing anyone. They get this culpability for the murder because they happen to be there
around somebody,
and that comes with a life without parole sentence.
Can I jump in, please?
Sure.
I just wanted, and I'm so sorry, but her brothers are the single most egregious example of that I'm aware of in the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. These two men had lived exemplary lives, not a single, not even an arrest, juvenile or otherwise.
No.
And they were offered a plea deal of 4 years to just to plead to it, and then that's it. And they didn't take it because they're innocent. An innocent man would say, I didn't do it, I can't plead to something. And you know what? They did that, and then they were convicted, and now they are condemned to die in prison. And they had an opportunity to be sent to the governor's desk for a commutation back in December, and they were denied by members on our board. And I've staked my entire career on them getting another chance and getting a chance to make it to the governor's desk. We in Pennsylvania cannot allow these kind of people to die in prison. It's unnecessary. It violates the core principles of justice. It damages and destroys families like hers. And again, I can think of no more egregious example in Pennsylvania's prisons right now than her two brothers that absolutely deserve and are the quintessential examples of this so-called trial penalty, particularly among innocent inmates like her brothers.
And Lieutenant Governor, isn't it true that you are working on maybe some reform and getting the vote for the pardon, the Board of Pardon, to a 4-1 instead of the 5-0 that's required now?
They are, but that measure, if it ever does pass, is a long way out. It will not help these two brothers and others like them. And it's going to come down to, you know, getting the votes that we need to get that to the governor's desk. It's just that simple. And from my perspective, it's not my signature. It's not anyone else's signature on the board that ultimately frees an inmate. It's the governor's decision. And the governor wants these names on his desk. You know, I, as lieutenant governor, want these names on his desk. And we need to, because we have prisons full of people just like the Horton Brothers who are either innocent or took the chance to go to trial and now are paying the ultimate penalty, and that's dying in jail. And to her point, the man that actually shot the individual, how many years has he been walking around?
For at least eight years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they've done collectively between your two brothers, they've done 54 years in prison, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And not one single misconduct between them. Not one. That's amazing. That's remarkable. And I said this during the hearing, either your brothers are innocent or they have been meticulously faking lives of innocent men their entire life, and that's extended into 27 years in prison. And it's a travesty, and it is horrendous, and that can't change. It has to change, excuse me. If 4 years was considered justice back in the 90s, what is 27 years and running? And we need to get them back up, and we need to get their 5-0 vote, and we need to get them to the governor's desk, because I cannot stand by and let them die in prison. Your father and your family testified at the hearing, and I saw the anguish in his eyes. Mm-hmm. And it's horrifying and mortifying. And we in Pennsylvania need to embrace the second chance. And for those like your brothers, again, there is no more, I think, urgent and just example of what the trial penalty is, but also the travesty of dying in prison for no reason other than that you were innocent and you wanted your day in court.
Certainly. And let me ask you, press this a little bit on that, Lieutenant Governor. I mean, obviously you were the only person on this panel that was in that room when the discussion was happening. I mean, are you able to give us a little insight as to what the apprehension was from other members as to why they didn't vote?
From the two members that voted no, they either didn't believe it, and I'm not going to speak for the other two members that voted no. But what I can say is that what was not up for dispute was the fact that they had no juvenile arrests, they had no adult arrests, and they grew up in a very economically challenged part of Philadelphia. And we had members on my staff say, hey, I grew up in that same neighborhood, and that's no small accomplishment. They weren't out there like that. That was the phrase. And the literal warden of the facility came to plead for mercy to get these young men, now middle-aged men, to the governor's desk. And that's the point. And it's like, if 27 years of impeccable behavior isn't enough, and never having an arrest ever in their lives. I've been arrested. I've been arrested. I don't know what is, and we can't. And again, something in me, really sharpened and changed that day, because you have people just like her brothers that are otherwise, but for this kind of intervention, are going to die in prison as either innocent men or people that have been punished by 10, 15, 20, 25 years or more beyond what an initial plea deal was offered to them, which, quote, was justice served at the time. And then you see more and more revelations come out about how corrupt and damaged the prosecution's office was during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that's when these cases have originated from, And the thing is like, let's assume they're guilty. No one's gotten away with murder. 27 years. They were never even once accused of being the trigger man. They were just in a car, so they didn't even take the life. But unless we get these names to the governor's desk, they will have their lives taken through incarceration by Pennsylvania.
I can tell you, Joshua, there is, I do the whole CLE route. There's lots of courses on these subjects, and pardons. People are talking a lot about pardons. I have to say, the Lieutenant Governor has really energized the defense bar. I mean, I today was talking to somebody about an expedited pardon. But so I think there are people that hear this energy and this excitement, and they're beginning to, there's rhetoric out there about how, oh, if you're paroled after so many years, you're more likely to commit X crime, or that's what the rhetoric is out there, and that creates fear. So the only way to combat that is to have actual empirical data that shows that that is not true if certain things are put into place. Obviously, if you have no support when you get paroled, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. But I think that's part of it as well, that there's a bit of fear mongering going on.
Well, absolutely. And then, you know, we're the pardons and commutations is distinct from parole. And if you look at the recidivism rate for juvenile lifers, I believe it's 1%. 1% of recidivism. So this idea that you're making anyone less safe by giving some of these people a second chance, you know, is absurd, and it's just not statistically true. And like I said, you know, I'm coming for them one way or the other. And my point is that these men and others like them, men and women, do not deserve to die. And two examples work on my staff now. George Trudell did 32 years for a crime when the actual person that killed the individual did 7 years. Naomi Blunt, also of Philadelphia, Strawberry Mansion, was forensically exonerated by a judge in 1985 of having any involvement in this death. Yet she was condemned to die and was originally rejected by the Board of Pardons, even for a review, let alone an actual vote. These are the kind of people that we are discarding on wholesale and spending $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, those as they age into the system, a year just to warehouse these people until they die. You know, 1,200 of which never even took a life in Pennsylvania.
Certainly, and I think that was probably one of the more eye-opening experiences for me was visiting SDR Laurel Highlands, which, for all intents and purposes, operates a nursing facility within a Pennsylvania prison. I mean, you go in there and it's men in wheelchairs. It's men who can't get out of bed anymore, who are sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of getting out. And there is no fundamental way to look at these men and think that they pose any public safety threat if they were to be released. I mean, they
I mean, how much is enough? How much is enough? And like the Evans brothers is another example. They were up at the same time as the Horton brothers. The Evans brothers chose to steal a car, which they shouldn't have done, and they've owned that. And when they dropped the man off at a payphone, he ended up suffering a heart attack. And they offered the Evans brothers 10 years to plead guilty, and they said they didn't agree, and they ended up going to trial. And they've done now 38 years in prison. 38 years in prison. And they were offered deals of 10 to 20, you know, and they didn't directly kill anybody. Again, it's the insanity of felony murder in Pennsylvania, that even though you didn't take a life, yours will be taken. And then when you tack that on to the trial penalty, you have 4 men that have collectively done about 100, close to 130 years in prison, and neither one of them took a life. And you know what's crazy? Each one of them, unless there's intervention, will serve the exact same sentence as the Tree of Life shooter that went in and massacred 11 people in their house of worship. And if you try to defend that as justice-based, then it's indefensible, and we can't have that here in Pennsylvania. And again, I've staked my entire professional career on this idea that we can't allow this, because it undermines the integrity, and it is antithetical to what true justice is, and it doesn't make anybody less safe.
And Joshua, between the 70s and the 90s, the commutations, there were hundreds of commutations. You know, we're a state where one incident happens and we just gave up on an entire population. So I feel like not only do we need to support this, but we also have to be prepared for when that incident does occur. We have to have a plan in place where we don't allow what happened in the 90s to happen again. Then all these people have been for nothing.
The thing is that, you know, the Mcfadden tragedy, I've talked to inmates, and, you know, they said they were astonished when they found out that Mcfadden got a commutation. They're like, he is dangerous. There's no way he should have gotten out. And the process has changed, and it's much more thorough, and it's much more, and we have those now that can evaluate those on a stronger level. But this idea that you will throw away thousands of people's lives based on the horrific actions of one that was mistakenly let go. Now, I believe that was 25 years ago. We have the second highest population of LWOP inmates, second only to Florida. And we have an opportunity to do something about that. We have a governor who believes in a second chance, and you have myself who believes and wants to make sure that the people that deserve and need to be in prison are in prison, but those that are better served and their communities are made better off should be afforded the opportunity to once again rejoin society.
Sure. And just to back up, just to explain to any reviewers who may not be aware of the Mcfadden incident. I mean, prior to 1995, to get a recommendation for a commutation from a life sentence, you only needed a vote of 3-2.
You only needed 3-2 to advance to the governor's desk. And then post Mcfadden, it was 5-0. And
sorry.
Yeah, it was changed constitutionally to 5-0. And to change that back to 4-1 or 3-2, you would have to go through 2 consecutive sessions of the legislature, and then you'd have to get it on the ballot statewide to change it. So that's not going to help people like the Horton Brothers or the Evans brothers or all these other people that are going to otherwise die in jail. And you know what? You get a governor that doesn't believe in a second chance, or you get other people on the board. You know, if it's not 5-0, it's effectively the same as 0-5, and that's one of the tragedies here. And there are enough clear-cut ones where my mantra is err on the side of mercy. Err on the side of mercy. Get it on the governor's desk. Let him be the decider on who deserves a second chance or not. And I might agree or disagree with the governor on his final choice. I certainly wouldn't vote for someone that I didn't know was an excellent candidate. But at least that's where constitutionally that authority really rightfully vests. The board is an advisory one, and we need to make sure that we get those names to his desk.
Sure. And just again, for background, I mean, in the 70s, there were 200 and some people actually commuted from a life sentence.
Milton Schaap has the most commutations of any Pennsylvania governor, and I believe it's 220, 225. And since then, we've had governors that haven't had a single one, not one. And we wonder why we have 5,600 people, doing life without parole in Pennsylvania. And I want to be clear, there have been people that have come before us that I voted against commutation because they did pose a danger to society and they weren't ready. But the majority of the ones deserve that chance and they deserve that reconsideration. And then there's other ones that are actually factually innocent. People like John Brookins, who is being denied a basic DNA test to show him whether he's guilty or not. And he's being denied that by the Bucks County District Attorney's Office. Or Pedro Reynoso. 12 witnesses can testify to the fact that this man was in the Dominican Republic. And again, the victim's family claims that he's not the killer. Something's fundamentally broken, and we have to change that because this isn't justice, and it's certainly not about public safety.
Well, let me ask you. Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to mention that in the 1970s, mercy and prosperity coexisted in Pennsylvania. Those
exactly
go hand in hand. And I think when we let that go, you began to see parts of the state die. I mean, literally die, go from life to death.
Sure. And that's so it's a story that I've told a few times before. I was up at the state archives prior to COVID hitting, and I was pulling through applications for life without parole. And one of the cases was a first-degree murder case, and the comment from the district attorney on the application was that the applicant was deserving of clemency, which just feels so out of step. It feels drastically different than where we are as a society now. Let me ask this, Lieutenant Governor. We have a question from a viewer. What are some things that people can do to get involved or advocate for the Horton Brothers so that the next time they are up for a commutation, hopefully they have a better outcome?
You can just let your views known on social media and let those individuals whose fate it rests in terms of their vote, let them know how you feel and advocate. And that's the thing, like, this is about advancing a name to the desk of the governor. This isn't saying, well, okay, I say yes, so this person gets let out. This is saying that this person is deserving to be considered by the governor. So this is not the final step in terms of that person's journey. And, when Secretary Wetzel served on a panel with me, said, you could release a third of our inmates and not make anyone less safe. That's talking about reducing our corrections budget by almost $1 billion, effectively $1 billion, and not make us any less safe. And what could you do with that money? And again, you see the tragedy of what happened with George Floyd, and you have this, I can't breathe. And it's like, you can be suffocated in a matter of minutes, or you can be suffocated over decades. And that's exactly what's happening to the Horton brothers. These are innocent men that were offered terms of 4 years in prison, 4 years in prison, and that would have been considered justice. And they, as innocent men, went to trial and now have been in jail for a combined 54 years. And that's not justice. That's not public safety. That's a grave miscarriage of justice. And we owe it to ourselves to make sure that and others, those wrong things are put right. And as I said, I've made that one of the core missions of my service here as your Lieutenant Governor.
The case with the Horton brothers is very important, because if you read their history and the potential they have, if this goes through, when it goes through, I think they're going to flourish in society, and they are really going to be perhaps that force that we need to take this entire movement and normalize and return it to where it was in the 70s. I mean, you can just feel it, that they have the potential to do that.
I agree. It's astonishing. It's like the warden came to the hearing and begged for mercy. I ask every time there's a corrections facility, member of the Department of Corrections that is willing to testify on an inmate's behalf, what would you feel about this person being your neighbor? She said, I would welcome it. I would love to have them be my neighbors. I want to have coffee with these two gentlemen when they get out. Like, she implored for mercy. And if the warden of the facility is begging for mercy, who are we that have spent half an hour with these people to presume that we know better to stop their journey to the governor's desk? And I would never stand in the way of that. And I agree with you. The Horton brothers, I think, again, there's no more compelling or finer example of just how gross a miscarriage that is. And they would be the model that could re-energize this whole path to redemption, forgiveness, and rightful, again, just a gross miscarriage of justice.
Rochelle, let me ask you this. So if there are people who are tuning in now and they're hearing the story of your brothers, I mean, are there things that people can do that could help support your brothers, help support your family? I mean, what are some things that people on the outside can do to try to help you guys?
Well, they can sign a petition for one that we have for them. On change.org. Okay. They can get into that. Or I can put my number, they can call me and we can talk about doing things for my brothers, helping them try to get out of jail, and helping them call the governor's office, maybe talk to our state representative to try to help us. There's a whole bunch of things that they could do to help us.
Yeah, I've met with the Black Caucus in the House and Senate, and especially you bring up a great point. The Philadelphia reps and senators would be instrumental in making this happen. Your brother's case. Just imagine, anyone watching this, imagine having someone knock on your door one day and you are removed from your family for 27 years for something that you didn't do, and all you can point to is the fact that you have zero arrest record ever in your entire life. And then after 27 years in prison, you haven't had a single infraction. And then the warden shows up at your hearing to beg for a second chance on your behalf. That's extraordinary. But yet here your brothers sit in prison, and my heart breaks for them. And you know, ever since December, when that hearing went sideways, I haven't been able to think of much else than that, because there are so many of these individuals that are denied the opportunity to get a second chance. And again, your brothers represent the most damning indictment of both that so-called trial penalty, but the fact of that legacy of corruption that was present in Philadelphia in the 80s and 90s in the district attorney's office.
And so I don't know how many of you, so they're serving life without parole because of the way Pennsylvania has structured our laws. And I don't know how many of you have seen the lawsuit that was just filed by the Abolitionist Law Center on behalf of several people serving life without parole that's challenging that as an unconstitutionally cruel sentence for felony murder. And I'm curious if anybody had seen it, or your thoughts on if we should be at a point in our society where that should be what we consider to be a cruel and unusual punishment.
Felony murder is ridiculous, because you have all these examples of people that didn't actually do the killing doing significantly more time than those that did. You know, like, just imagine being offered 4 years. Like, if they really thought that the Horton brothers were guilty, if you were a prosecutor, would you offer someone 4 years if you think that they did it, or you knew that they were guilty? Of course not. You know, this was just about, hey, let's just get it through the system. And innocent men, I mean, how many truly guilty people would say, man, I could get away with 4 years after taking a life? They would jump all over that offer. But that's what they behaved exactly the way innocent men would have. And imagine that they have done right now 7 times longer than what they could have pled out to way back in the mid-90s. And that is not justice. And that is the very definition of cruel and unusual punishment.
Let me ask you this. So obviously we've talked about changing the commutation process is a drawn out process and a much more difficult process to do. I mean, are there legislative ways that we could correct some of this, especially with life without parole, that may be
Sure.
more expeditious?
All of it, but none of it would be expeditious. But what is expeditious? Getting them on the governor's desk. You know, getting them on the governor's desk. And that's what we have to demand, and that's what we need to lobby. And that's what I've been about, because ultimately that power should vest with the governor. And right now we have a badly flawed system that has stopped and condemned a lot of deserving people to die in prison that is unnecessary. You know, my brother and I are the same age difference as the Horton brothers are, and we're roughly the same age now. And I can't even imagine the trauma that visited on the family. Genuinely keeps me up at night, and I won't stop until I am not in a position to do something about that, to demand that level of accountability. And again, anyone watching, again, your Philadelphia state reps, your Philadelphia state senators, other elected officials, this is fundamental to restoring and atoning for the grave miscarriages of justice that came out of Philadelphia. Again, 84% of LWOPers out of Philadelphia are Black. 84%. Think about that. Statewide, 66% of those condemned to die in prison in Pennsylvania are African American. 66%. In my home county of Allegheny, the percentage is 74%. And of course, there's nowhere near that kind of statistical representation in the population. So there's so much baggage going on there. And to that point that was made earlier, they are the literal poster children of what a second chance is, what gross miscarriages of justice existed coming out of Philadelphia and other offices during that time. And they could lift up and inspire, I think, the state to revisit this in a comprehensive manner, to address it on both a legislative solution, but also from a hey, who else is dying in prison that doesn't need to? Who else are we spending $60,000 a year to warehouse until they die? We can't stand for this.
And Joshua, I want to just add points to that. The lieutenant governor is correct. The route with the governor is really the best one right now. There is a culture where if the Pennsylvania Supreme Court makes a decision, the legislature goes and fixes it and undoes it. And they go back and forth. There's no harmony. Nobody wants to take a second chance on people anymore. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect is nobody wants to talk about what we were like as a state and as a community in the past. We just want to pretend like it never happened. By bringing these cases back to light and bringing attention to them, it forces us to accept that. And that's just very uncomfortable. But I think if we have, the Horton Brothers, they're key because they will convince people that whatever discomfort you're feeling, it's worth it. Imagine what else can be produced from this. So we just need like a little light. And then I think after people are comfortable with what happens in the aftermath of a few decisions by the governor, if they go well, then you might have more harmony between the legislature and the courts. Then we can return to, business as usual. But right now it's not business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a body that's controlled by individuals that wouldn't even grant a minimum wage increase to $9.50 an hour. It's difficult and long at best, but we have a process. We already have a process that can get us there, and that needs to work, and everyone needs to demand that and exert the appropriate level of political pressure to make sure that that's a reality, and please study the case of people like the Horton Brothers. It is heartbreaking. It is outrageous. And it has to change. It absolutely does, because we are condemning brothers that grew up and were raised in an environment where they still prevailed, and they led a crime-free life and have done more than a quarter century in prison for a crime not only they didn't commit, but the man that no one questions actually did the killing was out of jail 8 or 9 years ago. That's so far from justice. It's you just can't even imagine how that could go on in modern Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. And just to put it out there, so we have the Judiciary Committee in the House and the Senate that where any of these bills would go through. We had several questions about who specific legislators to get in touch with. Representative Rob Kaufman of Franklin County is the.
No, I disagree. Every member of the Philadelphia delegation, those are the ones that we need to get on board, because to change the votes for the pardons board, that's 3 years minimum, more than that, because session's over. And you're trying to reach individuals that in many cases don't believe in a second chance. My time as lieutenant governor is going to be limited at some point, and it could all break down. It could all change. Right now, we have a window where we have a governor that's committed to a second chance, and you have a lieutenant governor that's committed to getting as many deserving names to his desk as possible. And when that window closes, it could go in a drastically more punitive or draconian direction. And I can't rest with this idea that the Horton Brothers would end up spending 30, 40, 50 years or even dying in prison. And it's like the Philadelphia delegation carry a lot of clout and a lot of power, and getting them involved and holding these votes accountable and making sure that these people make it to the governor's desk. I've seen it in action. And police reforms are important. We need to, but we also have to atone for the sins of the past. And one of those major sins is condemning people either to die without a chance at parole for something that they didn't even actually commit, or just for the simple idea of asking for your constitutionally guaranteed right to a trial.
Certainly. So we got a question, and I want to check with Wana if I have this correctly. We got a question: what can the PA Sentencing Commission do to address some of these egregious sentences? If my understanding is correct, at least with life without parole, it's nothing, because that's set in statute, correct?
Right. The Sentencing Commission has done a tremendous amount of work in the last few years. You really have to give them credit. They are giving attorneys in the courtroom the tools we need to, minimize the hundreds of injustices that could occur. And I think at the end of the day, they are for individualized sentencing to the extent that it's possible, right? Nothing is perfect, but I think at its core, that's what they're for. Whereas, life without parole, mandatory minimums simply throws out individual sentencing entirely. And we deserve better than that. We deserve better than life without parole. We deserve better than mandatory minimums. But like I think the Lieutenant Governor said, the road there requires atonement. But I firmly believe that if we do that, we go through a little bit of discomfort, we can return to the type of state that we were. I grew up in the 80s. In the Lehigh Valley. And let me just tell you, you were a kid and you literally felt like you were loved by everybody because people had jobs. Usually when people have jobs, they feel pretty good about themselves. And there's a lot more peace in the community. It's when those jobs went away and, everybody started to break away and it just was one bad thing after another. But I still believe there's a connection between this mercy, the atonement, and putting the state back together. It's all tied together. We're not just talking about one case here and one case there. We're really talking about all of us.
Certainly. And Lieutenant Governor, we got a question about the Governor Wolf obviously has the power to issue reprieves and pardons. What can you do with that? Can you just explain a little bit about the intricacies, why that may not be a straight path forward that's unilaterally his authority?
The governor doesn't have that authority to grant pardons and commutations. It has to all come through the board first. We're only one of 9 states that has a board of pardons. And we are the only state in the country that has a unanimous mandate to advance to the governor's desk. So this idea that the governor can just sign a pardon or a commutation, it's not true. It has to go through the board of pardons first. And reprieves for LWOPs isn't a solution. It just isn't, because they have to go back after a set period of time, and and that's not the solution. The solution is to allow a process that gets these people to the governor's desk, who has expressed publicly and privately this is what he wants. He wants to grant as many second chances. I want to point out he's done more commutations than any governor since Milton Schaap. And Casey, before the wheels came off, but not nearly enough, a long way off from off. And he wants to be able to do more. And that's what I've been my challenge is to get those people on his desk. And in the time I've been doing this, I can't imagine. In fact, I'll come out and say it, like, there is no finer example of the just and rightness of the case of the Horton Brothers. There just can't be a more compelling argument and case. And I couldn't agree more with what she said. It's like it could be transformative to this idea of this is what this state did. This is what came out of Philadelphia during this time. We have to atone for that, and we have to set this right. And just ask yourself, imagine the horror of being taken from your family and your community and in prison for 27 years, and you didn't even take a life. And the guy that actually did do the killing was out almost a decade ago. It's outrageous. The Horton brothers will pay the same penalty as the Tree of Life shooter that gunned down 11 people in cold blood. Think about that, without this kind of intervention. And that's why I'm pushing so hard, and that's why I won't stop pushing until there's a resolution one way or the other.
Hey, Rochelle, let me ask you this. This is something that I've heard from other men that I've spoken to who are serving life without parole or have since been released because they are juvenile lifers. When your brothers were sentenced to life, were you ever given an idea of whether that truly meant they would spend the rest of the life in prison, or that our view on it, even whenever they were sentenced, was that they would have a chance to get out at some point?
Well, when they say life without parole, I know that's a chance that you can never get out of jail. So that's like spending the rest of their life in jail, like the Lieutenant Governor said, dying in jail. And that's our worst fear, for Dennis or Lee to pass away in jail. because to me, they're still locked up. They're not free yet.
Sure.
And I know my brothers had done wonderful things in the prison system, the things that they're doing, because we have had gentlemen call us that we don't even know that has gotten out of prison that knew my brothers and called my mom and asked her, Miss Horton, do you need anything? Can I help you with anything? And she'll say, well, who's this? And they'll tell her, well, we know your sons, Lee and Dennis. And they're good guys, and they helped me while I was in prison.
Secretary Wetzel speaks highly of your brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't have this hour together end without apologizing on behalf of the Commonwealth for the disgrace, what that meeting was in December that
Mm-hmm.
denied them the opportunity to make it to the governor's desk. They should be home with you right now.
Yeah.
And also just for this grave miscarriage of justice. And you have my promise that I will do everything that possible to make sure that they are reunited with you and your family. I understand. Did your mother recently pass? Yeah.
March 19th.
Devastating. Your brother should have been home, and they would have been home, but for that vote. And we can't let that stand. And the most powerful force right now is your legislators in the Philadelphia area, because the ones like the Horton Brothers and the others that the Evans brothers, these are all from Philadelphia. And almost every other month there's a new exoneration, there's a new revelation. And none of these men ever got away with murder. You're talking over a quarter century. This cannot stand.
Wana, let me ask you this. Obviously we're hearing about this case, which is a huge disparity in what the plea offer was at the time compared to what they were sentenced to. We obviously have different variations of that, from life without parole to fixed sentences where there's a disparity with pleas. I mean, how does this operate whenever it actually happens? I mean, how do these pleas offers operate, and is any of that information provided to the judge and taken into consideration at the time of sentencing?
Well, typically the judge should not have a role, and they don't have a role in the negotiations.
Sure.
But if you're in the room and you hear, I mean, they hear it. If anything, they will hear about it. And sometimes defense attorneys, especially if the offer is very low, and this does happen a lot, they may want to make a record of it. So when they make a record of it, that this was the offer, you rejected it. So at that point, the judge obviously knows about it. Now, there are judges in certain parts of the Commonwealth that will punish people for exercising their due process rights. That's part of the trial penalty, right? I'm lucky enough to practice in Delaware County, Montgomery County, Chester County, and we have a lot of progressive thinking judges. They're reaching that point because they're getting more education from the state level. So I don't experience that as much as maybe I may have 15 years ago when it was very common. But I do hear from my fellow colleagues in the other parts of the state that yes, it's very common. If you go to trial, right, you're going to be punished because you decided to do that at sentencing. That is a habit that was almost so common that people would talk about it freely when that's not permitted. But
yeah.
So how, whenever you're going through these, I mean, how do you talk to your clients about what the ramifications are? I mean, do you make recommendations about whether they should accept a deal? Or
so I'm lucky in that I'm a private attorney,
mm-hmm.
and I can control the amount of cases I have, and I can really take my time. And I really, I make sure they know every little thing. And I mean, every case is like a war in itself, right? So I have thankfully never experienced this because I've been able to prevent the worst case scenario from happening. But public defenders or indigent counsel, they just get railroaded. I mean, their caseloads are far too heavy. So the likelihood of that happening in that context is very high. And that's really where it happens with attorneys who have far too many cases, not enough time. And at that point, you're just kind of going through the motions throughout the day. And that's why, state funding for indigent counsel is very important because it prevents things like that. It allows us to have more attorneys and less cases per attorney.
And if I'm correct, Pennsylvania is one of, if not the only state that does not provide state funding for indigent defense.
So, you know, the $1 billion that they could easily take out of the corrections, right? Could you imagine a percentage of that? Just a percentage? And I don't mean just defense attorneys like indigent counsel. If you look at models like in the Bronx and Brooklyn, these public defenders offices have social workers, they have job placement. It is a holistic approach because they don't want people to come back, and they know that there is an entire set of services that should be provided to individuals who come into the system in that form. So, I mean, it would be a completely different world if we could just take a percentage of that budget and put it towards indigent counsel and additional services that they would provide.
And so just to circle back onto the broader issue with that was brought up in Vanishing Counsel, I mean, Vanishing Trial, what are some thoughts on how we fix this concept that we're no longer going to trial and you're getting penalized for it? I mean, do we need to be charging less people? Pennsylvania, there's more than 200 and some thousand cases that enter the system every year. Do we need less charges? What are some other solutions that we can be doing to try to fix this?
Well, it's getting worse because with COVID, now you're having hearings via video. Who knows when you're going to get a jury, okay? Everything's being pushed through. So imagine how bad it was. It's way worse now. We don't even know when it's going to get better. I have one answer. I would love to hear the Lieutenant Governor on this issue. I think our prosecutors, there is an institutionalization process they go through. We do not give enough attention to what they go through, what their thought process is. Should they be permitted to get into politics? If you're an elected DA, shouldn't there be at least a 5-year gap between when you leave office or run for the next office? The political end of it has to be removed. Do we allow our prosecutors to have enough self-care? Are our prosecutors connected enough to their communities? The entire definition of the prosecutor must be changed, and we must show them compassion. If we expect them to show compassion to everybody else, they deserve the same amount of compassion, and obviously indigent counsel as well. So that's what I think.
Lieutenant Governor, did you have thoughts on that?
I think we need a lot of examples that illustrate the horror. That movie, the Vanishing Trial, illustrated the horrors in 3 different vignettes. But people like the Horton Brothers are actually living what I would assume would be everyone's nightmare, to have your life entirely stolen from you for something not only you didn't do, but you could have walked away after 4 years, and not. I genuinely don't know how a prosecutor, judge, or anyone that was affiliated with that trial could ever live with themselves knowing what they've done and what they're responsible for. And these are the kind of examples that we have to keep highlighting and bringing to light, that these people's stories and lives matter. And if you're not making the public any safer and you're costing billions of dollars a year to do it, and you are violating core basic tenets of basic justice, why are we allowing this to continue in Pennsylvania? And obviously, I would love legislative solutions and other things, but I'm also a realist in the sense that things in time change and elections happen. But right now, we have a guaranteed bona fide way to get the Horton Brothers home. And right now, it's stuck. And I need everybody watching now to help kind of unstick that and hold people accountable and start demanding that these names and stories make it to the governor's desk, where he has already committed to giving as many second chances as possible.
All right. I think I see Celeste pop back up, so I'm assuming that means we are pretty much out of time. So I appreciate everyone being part of this, and I'll hand it back over to Celeste.
Thank you all so much, our panelists. That was an incredible panel. Thank you all so much for taking out that time of your busy lives to share your stories and share your thoughts on the solutions. I just want to really quickly again just thank our co-hosts. We have NACDL, the Justice Collaborative, ACLU of Pennsylvania, Americans for Prosperity of Pennsylvania, and of course, FAMM. So definitely text FAMM to 21333. There are ways to get involved. We would love to have as many people on the ground involved in the criminal justice reform space as possible. So check out all of the work of all of our co-hosts, and also look at all the work of all of our panelists, and definitely look out for more information about the Horton Brothers and ways to advocate for not just them, but for broader changes and second chances in Pennsylvania altogether. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.